Good afternoon. I feel like some of the things I would want to have said have been actually covered quite extensively this morning. But I'll start with which is the idea of community, and community as an inspiration actually for great education, and an inspiration for an awful lot of the young people that we work with. And I'd ask the question really, which is how much like your community does your school look and feel? Because from my point of view, an awful lot of what our students find inspiring about school actually sits in the community outside their schools. And of course communities can be quite complex things. That doesn't just mean what happens in the streets and in the businesses around your school. Community can be more complex than that. But we see community as an inspiration for learning, and we think that our schools should look and feel as much as possible like the communities around them. And for that reason, therefore, we are passionate advocates for social action. And that resonates completely with everything else that we're already talking about this morning. And by social action, we mean real social action, which means that we get your students finding their own opportunities for social action. Please God, don't over-engineer it and try to manage it in the classroom, but get students out there finding their own opportunities, allowing them to fail, and experiencing for themselves the incredible liberation of being able to actually make change for themselves in communities that they care about. In our experience, students right across the ability spectrum, given the opportunity to make a change in their community, are naturally enterprising, and it's incredible what they can achieve. I'd like to go back to the idea of what success looks like. Good data gives us insight, which should lead to action, and that leads to positive change. But we all know that the question is, are we able to measure what we want to measure? And how do we ensure that what we're measuring and capturing it actually is going to be important to the people that we serve in the future? Are our students actually getting more resilient? Are they getting better at problem solving, for example? And the Aldrich Foundation has been working for some time actually on a model and quality assuring it called the Aldrich Specification. And we think we're making some progress. So if anybody else wants to talk about it, come and join us. We think there's a real issue in making sure that we celebrate the skills that our students bring in with them to the classroom and into school. We know there's a real issue at the moment about a culture of compliance, and actually we really like our square pegs, and the more entrepreneurial and engaging and enterprising our students are, the better. It's quite hard to reward that sometimes, but some of our students come from incredibly tough backgrounds, you all know that. How do you reward that and make sure that it actually enhances their learning experience? It's incredibly hard to do, but we have to be really careful to make sure we find ways to give students experiences which allow us to wave the flag for the attributes and skills that they have acquired long before they got anywhere near the classroom. I thought George the Poet actually phrased that incredibly well first thing this morning. I wanted to cheer from the rooftops. But the skills that our students bring with them are also skills that our teachers and our other staff benefit from too. So my big plea is that...
Your final plea?
Yeah, all right. Is that a school is exactly that, a learning community. So if we're going to be entrepreneurial, we don't just get to be entrepreneurial in the classroom, we have to change the entire institution. So when you think about what you're changing today, don't just think about pedagogy, think about the entire institution. What does your school look like as a whole?
Who is the head of, Ralph Scott, the head of citizenship and political participation at Demos, and you're going to talk about the role of school in communities.
That's right. Thanks, Jim. Sorry, it's a bit louder than I expected. Yeah, so I'm, as you say, I work at Demos, and we do research into policy. And my kind of area, I lead our work on education and on youth policy. And I'm doing quite a lot of work over the last 18 months on this idea of character and how that relates to the education system. So my opening argument, and you'll be pleased to hear that I agree with you in the results of the poll, that schools can play a really important role in developing communities. I think schools can do that in there are lots of ways, but I think there are two main ways I'm going to talk about today in my 3 minutes. The first is in developing capabilities that young people need in order to be active citizens, and that relates to this idea of character. And the second is the role of schools as institutions that can kind of encourage and facilitate social mixing between different groups. So on the first point, schools are expected to prepare young people for life and not just for exams. There's demand from this from all of the groups that might be involved, including teachers. I'm sure all the teachers in here today would agree with that point, even if the accountability system sometimes doesn't recognise it. And that's what lies behind this current interest in character education. Just a couple of points. One is that employers think this is really important. A CBI survey of employers found that 61% of employers were concerned about the resilience and self-management of young people, of those leaving school. And in polling that we carried out earlier this year, 78% of teachers disagreed with the statement schools should only focus on the provision of formal education. So there's obviously a demand within the profession for doing more on this. On the social mixing point, one of the things that's really important about schools is that they are a universal service. They're there for everybody, and so they provide an opportunity for positive contact with others that can lead to social integration, a more integrated society. So contact theory indicates that the right kind of contact with people who you maybe see as being different from yourself can foster that fellow feeling and lead to social integration. And it's my view that for a democratic model to work properly, it's crucial that people don't identify too strongly with those things that separate them, and instead can see other people's point of view, empathise with them, make compromises. That's kind of how politics works, really. But as I kind of indicated, there are incentives or policies that mitigate against schools playing these kind of positive roles. So one really crucial one is the accountability system. So the focus on data, the high stakes, really can squeeze out this character development point. It can really, and this is why we're all here today, I think, is to talk about what more we can do.
And be rebellious about it.
Yeah, exactly, and be provocative. And you won't be surprised to hear that in the polling that we did, 90% of teachers said not enough time was the reason why they didn't do more on character development. Just to finish, I'll wrap up. So building communities. The final point I'd like to make is, and it's something that's been echoed, is this isn't only a job for schools. It's important that all stakeholders in building communities play a role. So statutory youth work is something that's overlooked, but also youth social action and civil society. We're currently running a pilot with the Scouts Association, with the support of the Department for Education, looking at how schools can collaborate with other groups to build character. And there's also a role for employers in this. I think it's worth looking at the principles underpinning the Scottish Curriculum for Excellence, which was a kind of democratic discussion that took place within the country to decide what they wanted young people to look like, what kind of attributes they wanted them to have. And that's a project which we at Demos are looking to take forward now, to build that kind of framework, but for England, and to have a national statement of the purpose of the education system in England.
Although I'm a research director of relational schools, I'm worried about the timing, and indeed that they're probably going to start bringing sandwiches out to my left, which will make you glaze over maybe. I hope not. I'm here to make the case that relationships matter. I know that sounds incredibly sort of tacit, particularly in a room of sort of liberal educators from really progressive schools. You're here because you're outstanding, and so I have to say that within the regulatory framework within which you sit. I have to say that carefully, because you have to understand, when I go around schools, not all schools do think that relationships matter, but they do matter. They have an enormous significance on whether children are healthy, happy, and they achieve well. And we know that children who feel connected to the school process often achieve those outcomes. And relationships matter not just in the context of schooling, but that extends into later life as well. So what we know, the foundational argument here is, if you want to build a strong society, you have to start playing that out in school. The relationships you build in school, you will later get in society. And specifically, researchers underline this correlation between life satisfaction, that's what I'm defining here as well-being, which is linked to sort of positive things like whether you might engage in physical activity, after you leave school, or negative things like substance abuse. That health and well-being is linked and correlated to positive school experiences and negative school experiences. If you don't feel connected to school, are a significant risk factor if you're going to go on to things like substance abuse or criminality or unemployment, etc., etc. So the response, therefore, in Resnick's words, are that schools need to be intentional, deliberative, in the way that they set up the processes, the systems to support and nurture relationship experiences. And we make a stronger argument than that. We say that schools need to be like homes, or more like homes, particularly for those students who don't come from the kinds of home experiences that lead to those positive experiences of health and well-being. And what our research is showing and demonstrating really clearly, that where schools are deliberate in the way that they structure the school, the organisational components of it, class size, tutor group size, pastoral organisation, where they are deliberate about those, we see bullying levels in sharp decline. We see students who, particularly from coming from difficult contexts of material deprivation or relational deprivation, where they're coming from non-intact families, they are succeeding despite those contexts. That's why we make that case. And we make that case so that those children can not only do well academically, but more importantly, be happy, healthy, and go on to be agents in their world.
Good afternoon, and I'd say I'm actually really thrilled by the conversation so far, because I was worried that it might be all focused on how we get kids better jobs, but actually there's so much more to education which is thrilling. And I want to take you on a little bit of a journey that we've gone on recently. It's no surprise to anybody if I say that the world is a place increasingly full of conflict, division, and difference. And indeed, as a result, the British values agenda is a big deal for the department, for a lot of schools, and actually, and this is something we sometimes forget, for the whole of society. And we started recently to do a British values project to look at what they meant for faith-based institutions involved in education. And we got a bit sort of gummed up in it quite quickly, because we realised that we had some difficulty with it. And we've changed it now actually into a Living Well Together project, which I think is slightly different. And there's a conference to which you're all invited to next month. And I just want to give one example of the British value that we found quite difficult. And that was tolerance. And you might think, well, everybody agrees with tolerance, but Christ didn't call us to put up with one another. He actually called us to do something very different, which was to love one another. So we would prefer the word reconciliation. And Justin Welby's made it a big priority for his ministry as Archbishop of Canterbury. And he describes reconciliation saying, it doesn't mean we all agree. It means we find ways of disagreeing, perhaps very passionately, but loving each other deeply at the same time and being deeply committed to each other. That's the challenge for the church if we are actually going to speak to our society, which is increasingly divided in many different ways. And that is profoundly important in education, perhaps more important in education than anywhere else, because education is so much more than being economically productive, although, by the way, if you do want to be an effective employee, you probably have to be good at dealing with disagreement. But also because education is what builds our communities, it's what shapes our communities, and it's what enables people to flourish in those communities. I ought to say that I'm not just talking about this as a euphemism for dealing with multiculturalism. There's difference and disagreement of all sorts that we need to be addressing. So my challenge to you is, how do we provide an education which challenges our young people to be a good neighbour, to be a good parent even, in a way that deals with disagreement and difference, in a way that also enables you to love somebody and engage with them and care about them in a holistic fashion.
Brilliant, thank you, James.
Good afternoon, everyone. I will try to be quick. A teacher once asked me and a group of other kids at school to clean a wall that was covered in graffiti. And I can still remember his face when I slumped and said, "Oh God, what is the point? We're all going to die." So, just to warn you, I'm not an optimist. But I do firmly believe that we can fundamentally transform our collective quality of life if we come together and organise and take collective action to change the system. I think this coming together is fantastic, and I'd love to see how we can come together and project outwards in a systematic way to change education systems. And I think the specific area that we need to start by changing is to change mindsets across the entire ecosystem that we call the education system. Let me explain what I mean by this. If you think of the working mindset that operates and steers us when we think about the purpose of education, it's often highly economic. It's about getting young people into jobs. And that's clearly an important factor in quality of life. But we need to think more about the quality of work. And we need to think about young people creating higher quality work that they like. Often we talk about economic growth as being one of our purposes. And we know now that that's problematic. We need to think about economic well-being and the intersection between economic well-being and social well-being and environmental well-being. We need to take a much more holistic view of the purpose of education. And we often take quite an outdated, perhaps that might not be the right word, but a kind of outdated view. We think about getting people into jobs that perhaps existed. We're not really looking forwards. We're not really thinking about how do we empower young people to change the world for the better in the way that they want. And you'll get the theme that's coming up here is empowerment. I will yammer on about that word. I think we need to start to change mindsets by taking a much more realistic view of the world as it is, the world that is rapidly emerging. This is a new world, and to think then about how we want to shape that world for the good. We know that current ideas and systems are not working. Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, recently said, capitalism in its current form is not fit for the world around us. We know that we need new systems. We need empowered people to create new systems. But the good news is, it's not all doom and gloom. Oh, and by the way, we shouldn't forget the fact that we live in a world of hunger and poverty, in inequity and exclusion and depression and anxiety and hatred and violence and pollution and climate change and resource depletion and species extinction. I could go on. But we also live in a world of massive technological advancement, explosions in population, in globalization, in urbanization. We live in times of accelerating change and complexity and hyperconnectedness. So there's this incredibly complex world that we are trying to shape through education. It's not a small undertaking. But what is very encouraging are these new signs, and very substantial signs, that empowerment and social purpose are de rigueur, that these movements are happening. If you look at economics, open participation through Wikipedia, open sourcing. Now in Germany, 1 million homes generate 27% of the country's energy requirements. Sharing, we've got Uber, crowdsourcing, peer-to-peer lending in the financial institutions. We've got distributed leadership in the Netherlands. Jos de Blok is transforming healthcare provision by empowering nurses. He's allowing them to make all the decisions that they need to make without any central control. We've got social impact coming in business. I'm conscious, Jim, I am conscious of time, but I'll be quick. Social business models emerging. You've got the B Corp movement in the States, which is massive. Social enterprise is flourishing. Businesses are setting up their own social enterprises, Barclays and Deloitte being good examples. So the key thing is people want to be empowered and people want to express their social purpose, and it seems to me incumbent on us as leaders of education systems to empower people with empathy, with thoughtfulness, with creativity, with these deep human qualities that we know are essential to personal empowerment from within, so that when I'm given empowerment, I can act on that empowerment and make the world a better place. Thank you.